I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the depths of Hollow Nest as I begin my 3-part series ranking the Hollow Knight bosses from worst to best. So a little background information, I bought Hollow Knight on PC the day after its initial release in 2017. I love the game, I played all the DLCs at launch, I streamed most of them on my old channel, I own various Hollow Knight plushies, 2 graphic shirts, I purchased the digital Switch edition and the limited edition physical Switch edition sold on Fangamer, and all of this because I saw a game on Steam that just looked cute and I thought, ooh, I'll try that. What I'm trying to say is I'm a big fan of Hollow Knight. It's in my top 5 games of all time, and I want nothing more than to share my thoughts and feelings on a game I truly love with all of you. But I'm by no means a Hollow Knight expert. I've always geared my channel towards a casual perspective with my rankings, so you're not gonna see me talking about damage differences or various charm builds. The most you'll probably get is how to melt down a boss quickly and a brief focus on their movesets. I want to enjoy the fun and the experience, you know? This also means I'll be focusing on a boss's appearance in the main story, and I'll only bring up their Pantheon counterparts from the Godmaster DLC if there's a major difference, such as arena changes on the Ascended difficulty. Today we're tackling bosses 47 through 31, next week we'll tackle 30 through 16, and then the week after, my top 15 bosses of Hollow Knight. So, let's not waste any more time. All 47 bosses in Hollow Knight, ranked. Part 1. While you can make the case that some fights are objectively inferior to others in Hollow Knight, I can't deny there's at least one battle specifically that no matter the playthrough, no matter the experience, I always find frustrating. To the point where it may not be the worst fight in the game, but it is my least favorite. And number 47, we have Markov, the warrior dream found behind a shade barrier in the Kingdom's Edge, and perhaps that barrier was a hint to leave things well alone. Now, for what it's worth, I'm really glad the warrior dream fights exist. After all, they're backer characters from the Kickstarter campaign. And that's gotta be so cool having your character featured in such a heavily included role. Markov's design is fantastic, with the sprawling red cloak and being one of only 3 moths in-game you can interact with. His necklace and demeanor suggests a powerful warrior who's in tune with the spirits, and his meditation unknowingly ended in his demise. And it takes the knight defeating his spirit for him to also realize that truth. I want to like his fight, I desperately do, but it combines aspects of Hollow Knight's combat that I just don't enjoy. Firstly, the random movement of the boss. He can pretty much go wherever he wants in his arena, which is tough when a Dream Shield is constantly circling him. This makes timing your swings a must to do any damage. But the shield is combined with his ability to constantly spawn nails, which will appear and then fly towards the knight from a random location. And in the second phase, after he spawns a second Dream Shield, those nails get much faster. Sometimes they'll even appear from off-screen, making them impossible to react to, and that's just not fair or fun. This fight is tedium personified, as you have to wait for Markov to fly towards you, then hope the shields aren't in your way, get a hit or 2 in, all the while dodging these random nails. And in the Pantheon of Hollow Nest, where he's placed in the final stretch of bosses prior to the final checkpoint, his arena has no floor, forcing you to stay in one place and dodge nails until openings present themselves. It's too much patience, not enough reward. I think Hollow Knight generally has a great handle on the balance between difficult but fun and difficult but tedious, and this is sadly the fight that exemplifies the latter aspect the most. Thanks to the Godmaster DLC, many mini-bosses faced throughout our adventure were upgraded to boss status, and thus I have to include them on this list. We've got quite a few to get through, but my least favourite of these promotions are number 46, the Oblobbles of the Colosseum of Fools, Trial of the Conqueror. This pair of gigantic obels fly around the arena in diagonal patterns, and after a set amount of movement, they will pause and begin firing their acid cannonade attack. Now this attack may have a system to it, but in practice, when you have 2 Oblobles firing 4 projectiles each, that's 8 projectiles across the arena, any sense of skill goes out of the window. The best strategy is to herd them into one corner and Shade Soul the both of them so that you're dealing even damage. This is important because once one of them dies, the other becomes frenzied, regains a set amount of health, and its movement and attacks get faster. It's like a Toho boss was placed into Hollow Knight, and I don't think the movement tools of this game are designed for this level of bullet spam. It's not enjoyable, it doesn't feel like you're getting better at the fight with every attempt, and I just feel bad for anyone who dies here during the Colosseum trial, let alone in the pantheon of Hallownest at Godhome. Because the Oblobles come before the Sisters of Battle, and if you have a bad Oblobble run, unless you're like me and an absolute beast at the Mantis Lord boss, you're gonna get skewered. They don't even have any interesting lore to perk themselves up, but at least I have a consistent strategy to defeat them, and their projectiles aren't random, they're just overwhelming, which is why they rank above Markov. It's time for a brief diversion before I get back to the upgraded mini-bosses, as I need to air my grievances about another Warrior's Dream boss. I don't expect people to feel the same way as me, but this is my list and I have to be honest. At number 45, we have Marmu, the caterpillar spirit found in the Queen's Gardens. Now, as a character, I think she's adorable, and I love the story behind her creation, as her Kickstarter backer was actually Zara Pellin, mother of Team Cherry's very own William Pellin. We really love to see parents supporting their children in this household. Marmu was the protector of the Queen's Gardens, but passed away while awaiting the Queen's return, and to put her spirit to rest, you have to play with her in what can only be described as the world's worst game of dodgeball. She curls herself up into a ball and launches at the knight from various angles, which you need to either avoid or smack away with your nail. I can't imagine doing this with the default nail range, as your timing has to be on point. She can also teleport at random instances like the rest of the Warrior Dreams, meaning you've constantly got to be on your guard. This is all well and good, but I just find the fight incredibly tedious. When Marmu has the momentum and you're missing nail swings, it feels so oppressive, and you barely have time to heal, while when you have the momentum, it becomes a bit mindless with ease. In the Godmaster DLC, her Ascended difficulty arena becomes more boxed in as well, which introduces the hells of her physics engine, as if Marmu bounces off of any of the enclosed walls, her speed increases, and I just find it so difficult to keep up with. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Marmu is difficult. Despite my grievances, I only died to her once this playthrough, and this was on my first attempt of her Queen's Garden fight, because I couldn't recall the timing. It's been a while since I last played. But she's tedious, and she overstays her welcome from a health perspective, which is the exact opposite of our next entry. It's time to knock out a few mini-boss promotions, so let's start off with the easiest of them all, and my nomination for easiest boss in Hollow Knight. At number 44, the Massive Moss Charger. This behemoth is a massive variant of the Green Path Moss Charger enemies you've likely encountered on your adventures. Found to the west of the Fog Canyon entrance, I actually think fighting this guy early game provides a fun challenge for your moveset. The basic nail, a single dash. I recall enjoying this as a mini-boss in past playthroughs, even if this time around I was following a guide for footage purposes and ended up visiting this area very late into the game, thus making the Massive Moss Charger fight a bit of a joke. But it's the Godhome variation I'd like to focus on, as this was when they got promoted to an official boss. And by God, it's like stealing candy from a baby. If the charger launches into the air, just walk forwards, turn around and smack it as it lands. If the charger decides to follow its namesake and charge, you can time your hits to where you're keeping it constantly knocked back, and as the charger will continue to charge until it hits you and reaches the other side of the arena, you can kill it almost immediately. In its ascended form, the arena is actually wider for the player, which I'd argue just makes the fight even easier as you have more space to work with. Quick Slash is a godsend here, but whatever the case, They set this poor mini-boss up with that boss promotion, and I can't justify placing it any higher on this list. At least the massive moss charger dies quicker than Marmu. We're not done with mini-bosses yet though, as next up on our list we have the creature that, in certain timelines, has the capacity to kill off a main character. It's number 43, the Vengefly King. Unlike the Moss Charger, I like the Vengefly King because at least it has a strategy beyond simply ramming forwards into the night and hoping for the best. It'll fly just out of range on either the left or right of the screen before swooping downwards in an attempt to damage the player. And given the first Vengefly King is fought before you've even obtained your first movement tool in Green Path, you only have your single jump and pogo ability to carry you to victory and save Zote. If anything, it's a great tool for teaching the player how the pogo system works, as it's the only way to do consistent damage. If the enemy decides not to swoop, it will instead scream, summoning a series of smaller Vengeflies to the screen. In the early game, this can be dangerous, as despite them being some of the weakest enemies in the game, they can build up and you will find your smaller health pool decimated. In the Godhome DLC, I actually think this boss is sufficiently tougher, as on Ascended difficulty, they spawn 2 Vengefly Kings instead of 1, forcing you to juggle a duo with their own movement timings and health. And if you're on Radiant, I swear they like to constantly summon minions just to swarm you to death. At least you have the movement tools then though to hit the kings while they're off stage, so it's a nice trade-off. A solid mini-boss with a simple enough moveset to ease new players in, no complaints, it's just the rest of the boss roster is objectively better. For some, our next entry will be the first official boss anybody faces in Hollow Knight, and that honor goes to our queen, the Gruzmother. Found at the bottom right of the Forgotten Crossroads, she blocks the path to the abandoned village where Sly and Salubra can be found. So unless you don't want a shopkeeper, you best get to fighting. Gruzmother to me goes down with the most fight of all 3 mini-bosses we've just covered, as she wishes to protect her young, the Gruzzers resting inside her. And as for the player, you're likely to face her without any upgrades or spells, which makes her a bit of a challenge. She can charge at you, which you can pogo off of her to do damage. When not doing this, she'll fly diagonally around the arena, which also gives you opportunities to get hits in, but her dangerous attack is her Wild Slam, which has her slamming herself against the ceiling and floor, inching either to the left or right as she does so. In the Godmaster DLC, dodging this attack is simple, as you can dash through it with the Mothwing Cloak, but in this first fight, you have to time your movement so you can run underneath her as she launches upwards. Beyond this, take shots where you can, and slash at her to slay the beast. And in her Forgotten Crossroads variation, you are rewarded with the miracle of childbirth, as her children perform an emergency C-section on their vanquished mother, and it's your job to slaughter the baby Gruzzers to escape. Grim stuff. While in the Pantheon, she doesn't have this final phase with the Gruzzers, she does have a difficult arena on Ascended difficulty, where it's more boxed in and the ground is replaced with various spike pits, so dashing is riskier and you have to watch when you attack so you don't get knocked back into the spikes. It feels like a very smart Ascended challenge, and earns the Gruzmother a higher spot than her compatriots. Okay, well, he might be an absolute icon, a legend of the game, and a true cad, if I do say so myself. At number 41, we have the battle against Zote the Mighty in the Colosseum of Fools. Now, as an actual boss fight, it's ranked this low because I just feel it'd be rude to the actual fights in the game with, you know, mechanics. But from a lore perspective, this is the perfect way to wrap up the storyline of Zote, and it's easily an S-tier moment in Hollow Knight. You see, Zote has hounded you throughout the game, appearing trapped in various locations, and constantly berating you even when you go out of your way to save him. He's convinced he is the strongest warrior in the land, and yet when you find him below the Colosseum of Fools in the Warrior's Pit, he's caged up like one of their trained monsters. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does this not imply he was captured by the arena organizers while traveling, so that they could just throw him at any challenger they like? Thank God for him it was just us. Because at the end of the trial of the warrior, after defeating 2 Gruzmothers, Zote is thrown out of his cage and true fear enters our hearts. Is he going to use his sword, Life Ender, to end our lives? No. Instead, he flails his sword at you with every attack bouncing off. He can't do a single point of damage, and you get to knock him around at your leisure. It's an unwinnable fight. For Zote, as you toy with this creature that has made you out to be a true villain while you've just been helping him constantly. It's a satisfying conclusion, except he goes back to Dirtmouth, slanders you, and steals your girl. But more on that storyline in a later video. At least Zote gets his own back when you head to the Godmaster DLC and discover the Eternal Ordeal. Oh god, I still haven't beaten it. When people think about their first mini-boss encounter in Hollow Knight, they think of the Gruzmother of the House of the Forgotten Crossroads, kitty kitty purr boots down. But when they think about their first proper boss encounter in Hollow Knight, I guarantee they think about our number 40 spot, the False Knight. Found in the center of the Forgotten Crossroads, the False Knight is a maggot who stole the armored shell of Hegemol, one of the 5 Great Knights of Hallownest, and used its power to protect his siblings who lived in the abandoned storeroom above the boss arena. But falling to infection and madness, he now attacks any who approach his lair. Obviously, for the False Knight, I'm judging his first appearance at the start of the game, as it's blatantly unfair to judge him through his Pantheon appearance when he stays at roughly the same power level while you only get stronger. And here, without the ability to dash, moving out of the way of the False Knight's swings or trying to run under him as he jumps, can feel like a tricky challenge for new players. His leaps feel like moon gravity with the way he hangs there sometimes, or maybe that's just me being used to his failed champion variation speed. Either way, his fight is fairly formulaic. You have to do enough damage so that he staggers, allowing you to hit the maggot within the shell. He can perform leaping bludgeons, where as he comes down, he slams the ground to attack the knight, or once in place, he can create a slam that sends a dangerous shockwave across the floor. But his most dangerous attack is his rage. After each stagger, he'll begin slamming the floor angrily, causing infected barrels to fall from the ceiling that you can hit at the knight to deal damage. It's a great time to heal, and after he stands up, his health resets. I love that ultimately, you don't defeat the False Knight. A creature who stole armor to gain power was undone by that very power he sought to claim, as he breaks the floor beneath him, plummeting down to the ground where the maggot is unable to move, which leads to us delivering the final blow. A great bit of storytelling on part of the game, and a great way to introduce us to an enemy that's beyond anything we've ever seen up to this point, assuming you don't skip the fight by breaking the wall to the left of the arena. But due to his simplicity, the fight is staying this low on the list. Happy holidays, viewers! I am trying to reach 20,000 subscribers on this channel by the summer of 2024, and I know we can do it. See how many of you guys aren't subscribed right now? We need to fix that. So be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future gaming content. Back to the video. Perhaps this might be a hot take, as from an actual fight perspective, number 39, Fluke Mom, is about as far away from a traditional boss battle as you can get. This disgusting creature found in the crevices of the royal waterways is the mother of all flukes, spawning them from her grotesque orifices. She pumps out more children than a UK council flat, her desire to breed being increased thanks to the infection, and you, the knight, can only stumble upon her inner chamber by exploring the deepest depths of the waterways, and what can I say? I think that while the actual fight is pretty bland, as the Fluke Mom is unable to fight back herself, her only attack to spawn 2 Fluke Fays from her orifices to attack you, the reason she's not in last or near last is because I think the atmosphere and the sound design really elevate this fight. She's not meant to be difficult. You're wailing on a helpless mother whose incessant need to breed has been clouded as she fires her children at you so she can birth even more. If you arrive with a fully or near fully upgraded nail, you can kill her children in one hit, making the fight even easier. You don't even need to waste spells, just quick slash, fragile strength, and hack away. The hardest part of the boss is listening to the sound she makes. There's just something so icky about her sound design, which is absolutely perfect. Maybe not the most exciting boss from a difficulty perspective, or a moveset perspective, but sometimes I just need a good atmosphere to really make a battle shine. Next up on our list, we're jumping directly to Hollow Knight's endgame as we look at one of the new bosses added in the Godmaster DLC. And I think you know which one of the new ones I'm throwing under the bus. Halfway through the Pantheon of Hallownest, you encounter Hornet. Except, sorpresa, it's actually a new variant of a previous boss and our number 38, Winged Nosk. This is without a doubt the biggest downgrade in history. While the original Nosk wasn't the best fight at launch, requiring a moveset rework in the Hidden Dreams DLC, the Winged Nosk doesn't have that excuse to fall back on, because the flaw of the fight is inherently in the boss's movement patterns. Winged Nosk is essentially a more aggressive Vengefly King. The best time to deal damage is when it swoops across the arena. It can summon infected balloons, similar to the Vengefly King summoning baby Vengeflies, and like the original Nosk fight, it can launch an outbreak of infection orbs that coat the platform, as well as a downpour ability that allows it to drop a series of infection orbs from the top of the screen. It has the mechanics of the original boss fight, but fails to enhance them in a meaningful way, creating a boss that is ironically far easier to fight than its original counterpart. And given the caliber of the rest of the original bosses introduced in the Godmaster DLC, it stands as a drastic drop in quality, which is a shame because I love the fact that Winged Nosk is a reference to Nosk's original concept art, where they wanted to include the wings, and the idea of a Nosk that takes on Hornet's form could have been so much cooler than it ended up being. The only threat it poses is the outbreak attack, as I find the infection orbs difficult to avoid as they attack in an arc. And maybe also Winged Nosk's hitbox, as it's just wide enough that the knight constantly clips off of its back wings when it swoops across the stage. Not the worst fight in the game, but a bit of a letdown. Well, if it isn't the third and final warrior dream on today's list. As many of you learned from my Markoth entry, I'm just not a fan of those homing nails, regardless of whether they spawn in or they're there from the start of the fight. Enter number 37, Zero, found in the Resting Grounds. The warrior knight of Hallownest believed in true strength, and once the infection took hold of his mind, he thought that through battle and violence he could halt the curse. Yet this hope of his caused him to turn on the Pale King, and he was executed for his crimes. As we fight and defeat him, he comes to realize how irrational he was and shows remorse. And I like the Warrior Dream lore. They're always short stories that have a surprisingly sad core to them. But the fight itself for Zero, it's a tale of two variants. The Resting Grounds fight, where you have this massive sprawling room to play around with, is pretty simple, which makes sense as this is meant to be the tutorial warrior dream you run into first. If you need to heal, you can literally run to the other side of the room and Zero might not even be able to reach you with his nail casts. As yes, at the start of the fight, he has 2 nails, and at 50% health, he spawns another pair for 4 nails. Each of these he can fire towards the player, which will then be drawn back moments later, so you're having to avoid the initial attack and the boomerang effect of its return. Phase 1, simple enough, it's quick, with each nail coming every 1 to 2 seconds. Phase 2, the nails are being fired every 0.75 seconds, which is far more brutal to handle. But Zero stands this low on this list because of his Godmaster variant, specifically his Ascended form where the arena has multiple gaps. Because not only does it make dodging and hitting Zero a tedious pain for a boss so early on in the Pantheon of Hallownest, but his arena has a weird hitbox with the lower abyss. I've tried recovering on the walls of the platforms, but they're so close to the damage zone that it's just impossible to use them, and I really dislike that design. Yes, I know Abyssal Shriek is the strat, but Zero bounces around a lot more than your average boss, so I find I miss him with a lot of those hits. I prefer to Shade Soul him in the direction he's moving, which guarantees multiple attacks. I'm just not a fan of the homing nails, but at least with Zero, I could enjoy the fight to an extent, and if he didn't have the Godmaster variant, I could be convinced to rank him higher. We're officially out of the bosses I'm okay on, and into the bosses I actually really enjoy. Though to be fair, the only bosses I actively dislike are the bottom 3 on this list. Next up, we're headed to the Crystal Peak, as I'd like to talk about number 36, the Crystal Guardian. This boss does something I really enjoy, guarding a bench the knight needs to secure a safe checkpoint here in the peaks. You climb a long way to get to this room, and you're greeted with a crystallized husk who has gained mastery over the crystals growing on its carapace. Once a miner who died to the infection, it was reanimated and obtained its powers, now resting at this bench due to it being too tired to mine any longer. The battle, however, is very simple, and that's why it ranks so low. The Crystal Guardian will do one of 3 things: a simple laser beam that starts off small but has a half-a-second burst of dangerous energy that can harm the knight, a series of 4 sky beams that erupt from the ceiling of the cavern, targeting 4 random locations you have to dodge away from, or the boss can start hopping around. Once you understand the timing of the laser beam, you will almost never get hit by the Guardian's main attack, especially when you realize you can bait him on the direction he fires in. The sky beams are a little tougher to handle, but generally there will be an obvious safe space you can walk or dash to, though you have to be careful as the boss can combo this attack with his initial laser. It's the hopping that's gonna get you. The Crystal Guardian will either hop a long or short distance, and very often, he'll land right on top of you to cause contact damage. You have to be alert to avoid him, but once you've got that down, the fight is over immediately. Equip Quick Slash or Fragile Strength, and there's nothing the Guardian can do to out-DPS you. It just doesn't land any higher because it's such a short fight. He can only do 1 mask of damage, so there's no sense of danger outside of losing your progression in the level. And while I think the design is super cool, his harder boss variant later on presents a challenge more in line with what I'm after. As we ascend higher and higher, there is but one more mini-boss enemy that got the promotion to main boss we need to cover. So at number 35, we have the Soul Warrior. Of the mini-bosses that got a promotion, the Soul Warrior is easily my favorite because his moveset actually translates into that fluid, dance-like state that the best Hollow Knight fights have. Every attack has a clear counter, and being fought prior to obtaining the Monarch Wings means each jump the knight takes has to be accurate. Yes, you fight this warrior again in a hidden room guarding the Shade Soul ability, as well as in the Trial of the Fool in the Colosseum, but it's that first appearance that sticks with me. This scholar appears just before the upper levels of the Soul Sanctum, using its dive slash to ambush the knight. You can simply walk or dash out of the way to avoid this move safely. Then there's the dash slash, where the warrior dashes forwards and, you guessed it, slashes forwards. You can pogo over the warrior to deal damage here, and then lastly he has a homing soul orb attack he can fire. Jump over it to avoid the initial blast, and wait for it to circle around before it hits the floor and dissipates. In harder versions of the fight, you do have to worry about follies spawning as well, which is the case in the Pantheon of Hallownest, and while not my favourite gimmick overall, Soul Warrior's moveset is so clean and simple to adapt to that it's not hard to factor these extra dangers into the mix. I just enjoy the moveset being easy to learn, and finding new ways to quickly defeat these guys is pretty satisfying. It's a shame we didn't get a fully fledged boss that carries a moveset like this, as in my eyes, no matter what Godmaster says, the Soul Warrior is still a mini-boss. Maybe if the Soul Master wasn't so bloated on his soul, he could have taken up the sword and put up a better fight. Next up on today's list is an optional boss that leaves quite a big impression. Let's use our love key and go say hi to the jovial number 34, the Collector. This being, created from Void, has the best laugh in the world, and fills his love tower with a series of jars containing various species from across Hallownest. While we don't know the exact reasoning behind kidnapping all the grubs from their home in the Forgotten Crossroads, my theory is that the collector was always trying to protect them from the grub father who intended to consume them all for his metamorphosis. But the collector's lore is more interesting when you take into account this is a void construct. Then you remember the corpse in the Queen's Gardens with void leaking out of his eyes, the one you obtain said love key from. While not confirmed, I love the theory that this was the true collector, a high-ranking bug who enjoyed collecting different specimens from across Hallownest, and coming into contact with a void construct similar to the King's Mold of the White Palace, he spent too long with the creature and ultimately fell to void exposure, while said construct took on his personality and became the collector we know today. That's my headcanon, but I'd love to hear more theories. The actual fight, though, isn't really my favourite. For a first-timer, if you come without the coiled nail or the right charms, you're gonna have a really tough time. The collector is extremely tanky, and your best bet is to stay on the ground and let him leap over you with his movements, as he doesn't jump very high, but always jumps the same distance. It's a deadly game of leapfrog. When he hops onto the ceiling, he'll drop down a series of jars which shatter to reveal basic enemies. This is why you want the coiled nail or fragile strength equipped, so you can take these enemies out in a single hit and keep your focus on the collector, as if the minions build up too much, you're gonna find yourself losing the fight. Dashing between jars before getting to where the collector falls makes this fight very methodical and very predictable, with the only danger being whether the jars spawn near each other or far away. In Godhome, on his ascended difficulty, the enemies are upgraded, which wouldn't be very notable, except sometimes, and this is really fucked up, Team Cherry, he spawns primal aspids, which are easily the most hated enemy in the main game for their scary accuracy and ability to always show up when you least want them. Because the collector is so durable and tanky, his fight tends to drag on in the Pantheons, and it starts to lose some of that initial luster from your first encounter in the main story. If a fight is going to last a while, I want to feel challenged from the moveset, and the collector is very much a switch your brain off experience. A good time, but one I'd be fine shelving in a jar for the time being. If there was one boss that I struggled with more than any other on my original playthrough of Hollow Knight, it would be number 33, the God Tamer. And need I explain further? This boss is found in the Colosseum of Fools at the end of the Trial of the Fool, the hardest challenge in the base game. You have to go through hell to even get a shot at the fight. I still have nightmares of the sequence where there's no floor and you're pogoing and firing spells off at enemies while praying you don't slip and slam into the spikes for the 50th time. Then you're met with this bombastic duo. A veteran gladiator who, on her own, isn't very threatening, but she's instead backed up by her beast. The fun part about this fight is that in order to win, you only need to slay the beast, not the tamer, as she'll give up once she realizes she's alone. But doing this is no easy feat. The tamer has a single move, the leap attack, which has her leap into the air and target the area where the knight was last standing. Simple to avoid, but when combined with the moveset of the beast, things get tricky. The beast has two moves, the first being an infectious spew. Here the beast vomits infection across the arena in a series of groups. If you know your positioning, you can figure out the safe spots to avoid this attack, but sadly, that's my personal kryptonite. I never know how to avoid infectious blob attacks from any bosses reliably, and when he's spewing while the God Tamer is leaping, it can be tough to manage. His other attack is his roll. This acts similarly to the God Tamer's leap, where he'll roll in the direction of the knight, and upon hitting the wall, he'll bounce up into the air and attempt to land on the knight, targeting the spot the player was standing in when the beast hit the wall. Combine these three movements together and you've got a fight that can become very overwhelming very quickly. In Godhome, the fight poses no threat, you have the chance to practice and get better, and you'll likely be in a good position when you enter the fight, and you need to get good at it because the fight afterwards is Troopmaster Grim. But in its base game format, it's so easy to choke at the end of the Trial of the Fool, and it's happened to me enough times over the years that it sours the experience. A worthy boss fight on its own, but with the context of its canon appearance, a brutal challenge. Next up on our list, we're focusing on one of the main story bosses, one that cannot be skipped, but that has eluded my enjoyment over the years with its tough difficulty and ability to ruin my Steel Soul runs. At number 32, it's the Watcher Knights. I'm not against gank bosses in Hollow Knight, just look at how well the Mantis Lords flow in their battle. However, there's something about the Watcher Knights and their difficulty that always leads me to feel a sense of dread when I approach their arena. From a technical perspective, I think they're very well designed. You can only have up to 2 Watcher Knights attacking you at a time for a maximum of 6, and your goal is to defeat them as quickly as possible, out-DPSing them while avoiding their attacks. They have a double slash nail attack, which, if you can bait out, will make each individual knight easier to handle. But more often than not, you'll have to deal with their rolling abilities. Just like the God Tamer from our last entry, the Watcher Knights will attempt to roll over the knight, either zooming along the floor or attempting a bouncing roll. Dealing with one knight as they roll is simple, but when you've got 2 Watcher Knights who are both just out of sync with each other, you can find yourself dodging more often than you're attacking, dragging the fight out beyond what anybody would feel comfortable with. When they're in sync and you're dodging 2 enemies at the same time, able to get those extra hits in when needed to bring the fight to a close, it is quite satisfying, and by the time you face them in Godhome, you've got a fully upgraded kit and every spell in the game, so whatever build you're running, you can power through them. I actually prefer their fight in the DLC, as I get to relax and just enjoy the experience without that lengthy boss run back. But I just can't get over how in the early Hollow Knight days, before any of the DLCs were a thing, my Steel Soul runs were ended by these buggers constantly. Once they have the momentum, it's so hard to regain it. At least you can Chandelier by Sia, one of the Watcher Knights, before the fight, which I think everyone should do, as it's a free slice of cheddar cheese. I just wish that for a boss guarding one of the 3 Dreamers, we had something with more lore attached to them. They're literally just Lurien's guards and that's it. It's grim that they all passed away and you're fighting their corpses, but it doesn't hit hard when almost every creature in Hallownest is a possessed corpse. For the final entry in today's video, let's focus on a boss that has a sad bit of lore, a fun way of accessing the fight, and a decent amount of personality. At number 31, it's the Brooding Morlock. I can safely say I have a soft spot for this fight, as you can access the Brooding Morlock from the very start of the game, as long as you're capable at pogoing over the spikes guarding its chambers from the player. Its lore will likely hit home for a lot of extroverts watching this, as the Brooding Morlock was separated from its kind in the ancient basin, trapped in the Forgotten Crossroads. It calls out to its fossilized brethren, hoping for an answer that will tragically never come. Isolated, alone, forced to be introverted, it's lockdown all over again. Then add to that the infection creeping across its body, and you've got a raging beast that needs to be slain. The Brooding Morlock is fought in an arena with a raised center, and that's where the Morlock will generally hang out. It spits blobs of infection 3 to 4 times in your direction, which can be dodged through, before either using a leap attack or a vomit attack. Leap will have the Morlock jump towards the knight's last known position, which is a great opportunity to get some hits in and is easy to dodge. The Vomit has the Morlock launch a rain of infection across one side of the arena, which you can dodge by pogoing or dashing over the Morlock. Definitely hard to avoid before you get the aforementioned dash ability, as the Morlock asks you to keep an eye on a ton of factors to secure victory. It asks a lot of the player, and if you're not doing a lot of damage, you're going to find yourself in an endurance test to finish the fight. The biggest danger though is the Morlock's slash attack. If you get too close, it'll wind up a slash towards the knight with surprising reach. And this can be a problem if you don't have any charms that expand your melee range, as you'll constantly have to get in close to do damage. Spells work well here if you don't want to approach, but it's recommended to just use your nail and get as much damage in as you can. Ironically, in the Godmaster DLC, the Ascended version of this boss removes the central platform in the fight, and to me, that actually makes it easier. It's a shame though that it has to kill Tiso every single time it spawns in though. And that's the first third of my list. Are there any bosses you're surprised to see ranked this low? Which bosses do you think will show up in part 2? And would you fight Radiant Markov? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future uploads. The part 2 of this video will be out next Friday. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord. A massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me for another month. November was a little bit rough for me, so I'm hoping December goes better, and every bit of support helps. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios!